My name is Casey. I am 34 years old, and 2 years ago I bought my first house. Cozy, neat, with a bright porch and a spacious backyard, where from the very beginning I dreamed of planting flowers, so that in the summer mornings I could go barefoot to the cool grass with a cup of coffee in hand. For me, this was not just an event, it was a real achievement, proof to myself that I did it, that I can be an adult, independent woman, capable of building her life the way she wants, and not as dictated by circumstances or someone else's expectations. The mortgage payments were quite affordable, $1,500 a month, and I managed to cope without stress, because I work from home, doing freelance marketing consulting, and I felt confident in this. I earned enough to not only cover my own needs, but also to allow myself small joys like spontaneous trips, dinners with friends, updating my wardrobe and, what warmed my soul especially, helping my family when they needed it. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! My parents, Linda and Robert, were no longer young. Both worked part-time. My mother cleaned offices 3 times a week. It was hard work, and every evening she returned with calloused hands smelling of cleaning products, but with a smile that I always loved. And my father worked as a laborer when there were some orders, but he no longer had enough strength for constant employment. I understood how difficult it was for them, and tried to help as much as I could. My older sister, Jessica, lived across town with her husband, Mike, and their 8-year-old son, Tyler, a whirlwind of a man who was always video chatting me drawings and stories about his school adventures. Mike worked in a warehouse, but his schedule was chaotic and unstable, and at times he and Jessica struggled to make ends meet. I got into the habit of sending them money when they asked for it. Nothing special, maybe $200 here, $300 there, but I did it with an open heart, without calculation or reproach. Mom would sometimes call, asking for help with a kitchen or bathroom renovation, and Jessica would text that she was short on rent again. I never reminded them of their debts or asked for money back. This was my family, and I was okay. I could and wanted to help. And my home became my personal world, a refuge where everything was in its place, where the silence and order allowed me to concentrate on work and rest my soul. My second-floor bedroom was combined with a home office, a spacious, bright space where I liked to work. No one bothered me, only the ticking of the wall clock, the light rustle of my fingers on the keys, and the soft purr of the coffee machine in the kitchen downstairs. I often went out onto the back porch with my laptop, listened to the birds singing, watched the wind ruffle the lilac bushes along the fence, and thought, this is it, mine. I deserve it. After all the expenses, the mortgage, utilities, which cost about $200 a month, I still had money left over for savings, and most importantly, to help those I loved. One Tuesday morning in March, I was sitting at my laptop, sorting through incoming emails, when suddenly the phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and I picked it up, frowning slightly. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" I said, checking my calendar automatically. I didn't think we had any calls scheduled. "Casey, honey. I need to talk to you about something urgent." Mom's voice was tense, like she was trying to contain her excitement. "What's the matter?" "We need to do some major renovations to the house. The roof is leaking badly, and there's already some serious water damage in the living room. We called in a professional, and they estimate it will cost at least $10,000. I felt something clench inside, like a cold fist right on my stomach. 10,000, that's not just a couple hundred like before. This is serious. That's almost all I had in savings. "Mom, that's a lot of money," I said quietly, rubbing my forehead and trying to figure out how quickly I could transfer that amount. "I know, honey, but we have no one else to turn to. The insurance refused to pay. They say it's all because of the lack of maintenance in recent years. If we don't fix it now, it will only get worse. Everything will collapse." I stared out the window, silently, at my neat porch bathed in the soft March sun. Numbers were spinning in my head. I had about 15 grand in my savings account, which I was saving for emergencies or home improvements, like a bathroom remodel or a new refrigerator. I took a deep breath. "Okay, Mom. I'll wire you the money today." "Oh, Casey, thank you, honey. You're such a good daughter. We'll pay you back as soon as we can." I was about to say goodbye when Mom added, as if in passing, but I sensed that this phrase was the real purpose of the call. Oh, and one more thing. While the renovations are going on, your dad and I are going to have to move out for a few weeks. We were wondering if we could stay with you. My heart sank. I loved my parents, I really did. But I also cherished my space, the silence, the routine, working in my pajamas until noon, reading on the porch in the evenings, jogging in the mornings without makeup and in a stretched-out sweatshirt. Mom. I don't know. My house isn't that big, and I work from home. I tried to speak softly but honestly. Casey, we have nowhere else to go, Mom's voice shook. We can't afford to rent while we're paying for these renovations. Please. I closed my eyes and exhaled hard. How could I say no? These are my parents. Okay, Mom. You and Dad can stay with me while I do the renovations. Great. We'll come over next week with our stuff. That evening, after the call with my mother ended, I transferred the money to her account, silently, without much thought. I just went into the banking app, pressed a few buttons, looked at the decreasing balance and felt something shift heavily in my chest, as if I had pulled a piece of warmth from my heart, but I did it because I couldn't do otherwise. Then, not allowing myself to give in to anxiety, I went to the guest room on the first floor, turned on the light that I hadn't turned on for a long time, and began to tidy it up. I moved my exercise equipment to the basement, with effort, with a puff of breath, but without irritation. I laid out fresh, lavender-scented sheets, aired it out and put a nightlight at the head of the chair. I told myself that this was temporary, that this was not forever, that I could handle it. We could handle it. The following Tuesday morning, Dad's old pickup truck pulled up to my house, the same one he'd used to take us to school camp, only now the bed was loaded with suitcases, boxes, knitted blankets, and what I later realized was Mom's countless ceramic figurines, porcelain foxes, teddy bears dressed as ballerinas, miniature teapots, and shepherdesses with lambs. I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee and watched Mom carefully, lovingly, unpack the box, as if it were fragile not only in structure but in memory. I helped them carry the things inside, Dad grumbling about the steep stairs, Mom smiling gratefully as she arranged her knickknacks on the dresser, saying, "That's so sweet of you, dear. We'll try not to disturb you." I tried to smile back, but my weariness was already smoldering inside. "How long do you think the repairs will take?" I asked, glancing at Dad, who was unpacking clothes, carefully hanging up shirts. The contractor said it would take about 3 weeks, maybe 4, he shrugged. I nodded, went upstairs to my office, and sat down at my laptop. 4 weeks. I could hold out for 4 weeks. The first week was surprisingly calm. Mom cooked dinner almost every night, hearty, home-cooked, with the smell of fried onions and fresh thyme, and it turned out to be very nice, especially considering that I was always snacking on sandwiches between Zoom calls and consultations. Dad unexpectedly offered to help in the yard. He trimmed the bushes, finally took care of the rattling fence, which I remembered only at night, when it knocked in the wind. In the mornings, they left early to supervise the repairs in their house, and returned only in the evening, sometimes with groceries from the store or fresh bread. I almost began to think that I had worried in vain, that everything would go smoothly, with family warmth and minimal inconvenience. But by the second week, I began to feel something tightening inside me. Mom had quietly but relentlessly remodeled my kitchen to suit herself, rearranged the spices, removed my favorite French press and put in her old coffee pot, changed the towels, and now there was embroidery everywhere, like in our childhood home. Dad laid out the newspaper on my dining room table every morning, leaving crumbs and a cup of coffee behind. And now I found myself staying in the office longer, not because work had piled up, but because I simply needed a space where no one touched me, moved me, or said, "But we had it different." When I carefully asked Mom how the renovation was going, she sighed and said, "Slower than expected. These things always take longer than they tell you," and waved her hand, as if I just didn't understand how the world works. I didn't argue. Another 2 weeks passed. A month. I was starting to get nervous, not because I was struggling physically, but because the feeling that my home was my personal space was fading with each passing day. I tried to be patient, I really did, telling myself that this was an act of love, kindness, maturity. But one evening, when I was just about to go upstairs and finish reading the report, my mother suddenly, with some special solemnity in her voice, said, "Jessica and her family are coming over for dinner tomorrow night. I invited them over." I froze. "That's okay," I replied, trying to sound calm, although I would have preferred to be asked first. Mom, as if she hadn't heard, was already excitedly discussing what she was going to cook. The next evening, right on schedule, the doorbell rang. Jessica, Mike, and Tyler were standing there with a bag of pie and a complimentary bottle of wine. The house smelled of stew and mashed potatoes and green beans and something warm and familiar, like this was a family holiday rather than a weeknight. My mom was running between the stove and the table, even baking homemade muffins, and I could tell she was trying, really trying, to make this evening special. We were all sitting at my dining room table, and at one point Jessica cleared her throat, the same gesture I'd known since childhood. It always meant that a difficult conversation was about to take place. "So, we've been having some financial troubles lately," she began, looking at me directly but cautiously. "Mike's hours at the warehouse got cut, and I can't find a steady job anywhere. We're behind on our rent, and now our landlord is threatening to evict us." I felt that knot in my stomach again, familiar and tight. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jess. Maybe things will get better soon," I said, trying to keep the sympathy in my voice, even though my head was already pounding with anxiety. "Actually," she continued, lowering her voice, "we were hoping we could stay here with you for a while. Until we got back on our feet." I nearly choked on my mashed potatoes, took a sip of water, and slowly put my fork down. "No way," I said, trying to sound firm but not harsh. "Jessica, I've already taken in Mom and Dad while they were renovating. There's just no room for 3 more. There are empty bedrooms upstairs in your house," Mike interjected, with some force, as if he'd already discussed this in his head a dozen times. "We've seen them." I felt myself starting to choke, as if the walls, so familiar and warm, were suddenly closing in around me. Everyone was looking at me like I was being cruel, like I was unreasonable. But this wasn't about space. This was about privacy. About silence. About my work. About my right to my own. "I run a business from home," I said, trying to remain calm. And then Jessica's voice grew louder. "We're going to be homeless soon, and you're worried about your precious privacy," Jessica blurted out, and there was nothing in her voice except hurt, irritation, and some kind of pent-up rage, as if all the pent-up stress of the last few months had suddenly found an outlet in that very phrase, addressed to me, sitting at my own desk, in my own home, trying not to lose my composure in front of my entire family. "I never said I couldn't help," I said quietly but clearly, feeling the heaviness growing in my chest. "I said you couldn't move here. It's not the same thing. There is a difference." But Jessica suddenly leaned forward, grabbed Tyler's hand, and stood up so quickly that the chair creaked on the floor. "Come on, Mike. We're obviously not welcome here." And without waiting for an answer, she headed for the door. Mike nodded coldly at me, and they left, and the front door slammed behind them with a loud click, leaving behind the feeling of a gust of icy air rushing into the room. I remained in my place, leaning back in my chair, staring at my empty plate, my appetite gone forever, and with it, my calm. Mom shook her head silently, heavily, as if everything I had done in the past months suddenly ceased to matter. "It was very disappointing, Casey," she said with a reproach that cut deeper into me than a direct tirade of accusation ever could. "Your sister came here for help, and you turned your back on her." For the next week, both Mom and Dad were cold to me. There were no more home-cooked dinners, no more evening conversations on the porch, just dry sentences, brief glances, and discussions among themselves, loud enough for me to hear. They would talk casually about how big my house was, how much room there was, and how sad it was that Jessica and Tyler might end up on the street while I had entire rooms empty. I heard them discuss people who forget where they came from, and how success and money spoil a person. By Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was louder than any argument, and the constant innuendo was so exhausting that by the end of the day I felt like a lemon. I called Jessica and, mustering up the courage, suggested, "Maybe you could stay here for a while. Until you get back on your feet." 3 days later, they moved. That morning, the same pickup truck pulled up, only now it was filled with trash bags of clothes, boxes of toys, chairs, pillows, a kid's bike. Tyler was the first one out, shouting happily, and ran into the house like it was camp or vacation at Grandma's. I tried to smile. I wanted to be magnanimous. I really did. The first week was chaos. Tyler seemed possessed, running up and down the stairs, slamming doors, shouting video game lines, jumping on couches, and asking endless questions at the most inopportune moments. I had my headphones in, video chatting with clients, trying to keep my tone professional, and yet I still jumped every time he barged into the room. "Tyler, I'm working," I whispered, gesturing to the headset, hoping he'd understand. He shrugged and kept talking, as if working was just another word for play with me. I decided to talk to Jessica. "Jess, I really need some peace and quiet, especially during the day. I have important calls, clients, reports," I began carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. She looked at me with mild irritation. "He's just a kid, Casey. Kids make noise. You don't have kids, so you don't understand. You can't expect an 8-year-old to act like an adult." I fell silent. At that point, arguing was pointless. A month passed, and Tyler's behavior hadn't changed. His mother now picked him up from school every day and stayed home with him while the others worked. He ran around the house, everywhere, in every room, like it was his own personal child care center. I tried to concentrate, but I could feel the tension growing with each passing day. And then the bills arrived. I almost dropped the envelopes when I saw the numbers. Electricity, $320, almost twice as much as usual. Water, twice as much. I sat down, looked at the amounts, added it up by the day, and realized that I couldn't pay for it all alone anymore. That night, I placed the bills on the dining room table and, trying to speak calmly, announced, "The utilities have more than doubled. I think it's fair if we split them." There was silence at the table. Jessica looked up, her face hard, almost like stone. "We're not paying your bills, Casey," she said. "We're guests in your home," Mom added, no less sternly, as if I'd suggested something shameful. They accused me of being greedy, of taking advantage of their situation. Jessica started crying, saying that I was milking them for their last money when they had nothing to eat. I looked at her, tired, tearful, protective of her child, and felt something inside me deflate. "Okay," I breathed out, "I'll pay for it myself." Another 2 weeks passed. I asked my mother again when the renovation would finally be finished. She shrugged, looking past me. "They're behind schedule. This all takes time. We're saving up slowly to get it done." "What do you mean, saving up?" I asked, tense. "I gave you $10,000. "That wasn't enough," she answered calmly. "If you want us to move out faster, maybe you could give us more money to speed up the process." I stared at her in disbelief. I wanted to say everything I thought, but the words stuck in my throat, as if they were tired of fighting too. And then came the final straw. Mom and Dad started inviting their friends over for the weekend. People I remembered from my childhood, loud, party-loving, with hugs and the smell of cigarettes. "We used to have them at our house," Mom explained, as if it were a given. "But since it's being renovated, we need another place. Your house is perfect for it." Suddenly, my weekends, once filled with silence, coffee on the porch, and reading the morning news in my pajamas, turned into chaos. As soon as Saturday rolled around, the house would fill with strange voices, noise, slamming doors, and the smell of someone's perfume, too sweet, too loud. 8 or 10 of my mom and dad's friends would come over, people I barely remembered from my childhood, and they all expected me, as if it were a given, to bring snacks, make tea, bring ice and napkins, and then clean up after them, and all of this was happening in my own house, where I no longer felt like the boss. I started leaving the house early on Saturday mornings, before the smells of cooking and the hum of voices filled the rooms, and I tried not to return until the evening, taking the longest routes, sitting for hours in a cafe with my laptop, just to avoid all the crowds, to avoid the feeling of being pushed out of my own life. But every time I returned home, tired, wanting only privacy and peace, my mother would greet me with the same request, gentle but insistent, somewhere between guilt and manipulation. "Casey, honey, could you clean up after our guests? Your father and I are getting on in years, and Jessica is tired of keeping an eye on Tyler." And so I spent my Sunday mornings wiping up tablecloths, picking up trash, washing dishes, and cleaning up the aftermath of a party I hadn't attended and hadn't even been invited to. I never wanted to have guests, never agreed to it, but the house had become a kind of communal space, and I was a ghost, moving silently between the kitchen and the stairs. I kept asking when it would all be over, when they would finally come home, when I would be able to close the door behind me again and know that the house was just me, my thoughts, my order. Every few weeks I'd bring it up, hoping for some clarity. "When do you think the renovations will be finished, Mom?" I'd ask, trying to sound calm. "We're still waiting for the contractor," was her invariable answer. These things are unpredictable. "Jessica, any luck with your job search?" I'd ask my sister. "The job market is terrible right now," she'd sigh. "We're trying, but it's not working out." "Mike, how's the warehouse going?" I'd continue. "They keep promising more hours, but it's not happening yet," he'd say, not looking up from his phone. Every time I tried to push the deadline a little harder, to tell her I was struggling, tired, needing to know when it would be over, Jessica and Mike would immediately become defensive, like I was attacking them, like I hadn't been worrying about them all this time. "Are you trying to get rid of us?" Jessica challenged. "We're family, Casey." I thought family stuck together. My mother just shook her head in disappointment, as if I'd let everyone down. "I don't understand why you're in such a rush to kick everyone out," she'd say, as if I was kicking out strangers rather than just asking for my space back. After months of this, I was exhausted, burned out, drained. My work was starting to suffer. I couldn't concentrate anymore. Work calls were constantly being dropped, and the ideas that used to come freely and easily were now stuck in my head like a swamp. My home had become like a hotel. Only in this hotel I was paying for everything, but I couldn't rest or relax. My utility bills were destroying my budget. Every number on paper screamed helplessness to me. But every time I tried to talk about it, every time I raised even the slightest issue, I felt selfish, ungrateful, as if all the help I'd given was instantly worthless the moment I asked for some privacy. And at some point, I just stopped asking. I closed myself off, retreated into myself, and simply existed from one day to the next, trying to get through the next week without losing my mind. 6 months had passed. 6 months since Mom and Dad had, temporarily, moved in with me for a renovation that was only supposed to last 3 or 4 weeks. I was on the verge of a breakdown. My house had become a circus. Tyler would suddenly jump out from around the corner, running through the hallways, screaming loudly and slamming doors at any time of day. Mom rearranged my furniture every week to accommodate a friend who came over for the weekend, for the day, and Jessica treated my kitchen like her own restaurant, where she not only cooked, but also left a complete mess behind, which, by default, I had to clean up. The utility bills were snowballing, killing me financially, and I hadn't had a quiet weekend at home since March. I felt like a guest in my own home, where every corner was occupied, every minute of my time controlled by someone else's needs. And that Saturday morning, when I heard that a small group of old friends was getting together again, I decided, enough is enough. No more excuses, no more expectations. I would not leave again to avoid crowds. Instead, would go to where it all began, to my mom and dad's house, and see for myself what stage their renovation was at. The drive took 20 minutes. I hadn't been there since they moved in with me. All this time, I took their word for it, about the extended deadlines, about the difficult contractors, about the time it would take to renovate. As I pulled off the highway, I could already picture the construction equipment, piles of materials, and workers in hard hats scurrying back and forth. But when I pulled onto their street, my heart sank. There was a minivan in the driveway that I didn't recognize. The yard was neatly kept, the grass was neatly trimmed, flowers bloomed along the path, and children's toys were scattered across the front lawn. There were no construction materials in sight. Not a nail, not a board, not a piece of masking tape, I parked across the street, not believing my eyes. The house looked more than lived in. It looked better than it ever had. Someone had planted fresh flowers, painted the front door the bright blue my mother had always wanted but put off. My heart was pounding so hard I could almost hear it in my ears as I walked up to the door and knocked. The door was opened by a woman in her 30s, with a tired but friendly face and a toddler on her hip who kept reaching for her necklace as if it were the only toy in the world. She looked slightly surprised but not alarmed, and her voice was soft, polite, and calm when she said, "Can I help you?" I stood on the porch, already feeling my insides tighten, as if my body knew that something was about to happen that would change everything. "Hello," I began, trying not to let the tremor in my voice show. "Sorry to bother you. Who are you and what are you doing here?" The woman frowned slightly, looking from me to the entrance, as if I might be one of the neighbors or a real estate agent. "This is my parents' house," I said, feeling the words scrape my throat. Her face became even more confused. "Sorry, but I think you have the wrong address." "We've been renting this house for 6 months now," she replied, hugging the child a little tighter. My stomach clenched. "Rent from who?" I asked, though the answer was already rumbling inside me, gathering momentum like an approaching storm. "The owners, Linda and Robert Williams. They said they needed to move temporarily for a family emergency. We have a lease and everything." "Is there a problem?" No, there was no problem. Of course there wasn't. I even managed to apologize for the mix-up, somehow pulling words out of myself that I later forgot to remember. I turned around and groped my way to the car, my hands shaking as I turned on the ignition. There were no questions left in my head. Only answers. Everything clicked into place. There had been no renovation. There never had been. My parents, Linda and Robert Williams, had lied to me for 6 months, living in my house rent-free while they collected rent from tenants for their own home. And the $10,000 I'd willingly wired, thinking I was helping, had turned out to be nothing more than profit. Profit. Pure, cold, and planned. The drive home was like a dream. No, like a bad dream, where everything around you seems unreal, like you no longer belong to this reality, but are simply watching from the sidelines as what you thought was solid collapses. I was furious. I was deeply hurt. And I felt betrayed to the very bone, not by enemies, not by strangers, but by those closest to me, by blood, by those I considered untouchable in my heart. And if I had previously suspected that Jessica might simply not be in the know, now I was almost certain that she was involved in this, too. As I pulled up to the house, I immediately heard laughter and music coming from inside. Another weekend party was in full swing. I turned off the engine, but did not go out right away. I sat for a couple of minutes, closing my eyes, gathering my courage. I felt a wave of anger building inside me, so hot that I thought if I didn't tell the truth now it would tear me apart from the inside. I walked through the front door and saw that the living room was full of people. Mom's friends were everywhere, sitting on my couch, eating the food I'd bought, drinking wine from my fridge, laughing loudly and pretending they were at some cozy country club. Tyler was darting between the adults' legs like a comet, and Jessica was helping Mom carry out the snacks, her face beaming like this was her home. "Casey," Mom said when she saw me. "You're home early. Come join us." I looked around the room, full of strange faces, people I hadn't invited, who didn't know they were in a house full of lies. "Everyone needs to leave," I said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. The conversation instantly stopped. Every head turned in my direction. "Excuse me?" Mom said, her smile fading. I said, "Everyone needs to leave. The party's over." "Casey, what's gotten into you?" Dad asked, standing up from his chair, surprise and irritation mixed in his voice. "Everyone who doesn't live here needs to get out of my house right now," I repeated, a little louder to drown out the murmur that had started up again. Mom's friends began exchanging glances, some already standing up, starting to gather bags and coats, some remaining seated, confused, but still understanding that the evening was over. "Casey Marie Williams, you're embarrassing me in front of my friends," Mom hissed, pressing a napkin to her lips. Okay. Maybe you should be embarrassed, I answered calmly but firmly. 10 minutes later, the guests left. Some apologized, some cast puzzled glances in my direction, some simply left silently, avoiding my gaze. When the door closed behind the last one, a tense, heavy silence reigned in the house. In this silence, only my family remained. What the hell is wrong with you? Jessica demanded, her face red with anger. You just humiliated Mom and Dad in front of their friends. You want to know what's wrong with me? My voice was shaking with anger that I could no longer contain. I just drove past Mom and Dad's house. Mom paled so suddenly that her lips were almost white. Dad sank back into his chair with a thud. There are no repairs, are there? I continued, slowly, each word like a blow. There never were. You rented the house to a family with a small child and lived here rent-free this whole time, receiving rent from them. Casey, you don't understand, Mom began, her voice fragile, as if she were afraid of her own explanation. I understand perfectly well. You lied to me. You took $10,000 from me under false pretenses and have been living in my house for 6 months like freeloaders. That's not true, Dad said weakly, but his eyes couldn't hold my gaze. Then explain to me, I whispered, feeling my throat tighten. Explain to me how another family is now living in your beautiful house when you swore it was being renovated. Jessica stepped forward, her face calm, but there was something in her eyes that I had long ago learned to recognize, that impenetrable, confident mask of an older sister who was used to keeping everything under control. Casey, calm down. I'm sure there is an explanation for this, she said, trying to sound as if everything that was happening was just a misunderstanding that could be resolved with a few words. Oh, are you sure? I turned sharply to her. Then you knew about this, didn't you, Jessica? She froze. No word. No attempt to justify herself. No surprise. Her silence was the confirmation I needed. In that second, I realized, you all knew. You all had been lying to me all this time, day after day, week after week, with every call, every look, every lie about renovations and slow-moving contractors. We needed the rental income, my mother interjected, her voice almost reproachful, as if this were a banal necessity understood by any adult. We're getting older, Casey. We need financial security. So you decided to rob me instead? I exhaled, looking straight into the eyes of the woman who had once stroked my hair when my stomach ached. You have more than enough, Mike suddenly interjected, with that contemptuous calm that made me want to scream. Look at this place. You're doing fine. That's not the point. I screamed, letting my voice out for the first time in months. You lied to me. You all lied to me. Months. Months of disappointment, humiliation, betrayal, and I, like a fool, kept putting up with it. I want you all out of my house. Pack your things and leave. Now. Mom and Jessica exchanged glances. And then, they laughed. Really. With genuine amusement, as if I'd just told a particularly stupid joke. We're not going anywhere, Jessica said with a slight smirk. What did you just say? I could hardly believe my ears. You heard me. We've been living here for 6 months. You can't just kick us out, her voice became sharp, like a knife on glass. This is my home. I can do whatever I want, I breathed out, feeling the heaviness rise in my chest. Actually, you can't, Mom said quietly but firmly, crossing her arms. We're permanent residents now. If you want us to leave, you'll have to go through the proper legal channels. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by my family who were now holding my home hostage, and I couldn't understand how any of this was possible. How the people I loved, supported, trusted could suddenly turn into people who could do something like this. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs to my bedroom and slammed the door so hard the glass shook for a long time. Downstairs, I heard them talking again, loudly, animatedly, and somewhere in the noise there was a triumphant note. They were celebrating their victory. I didn't leave my room for the rest of the day. I ordered takeout, ate half a sandwich, threw the rest away. I sat on the floor by the window, hugging my knees, trying to figure out what to do next. My family had outsmarted me. They had fooled me so easily, as if it were a routine, and now I was alone, without a plan, without support, without any idea how to cope. The next morning, I got dressed, grabbed my jacket, and simply walked out of the house without saying a word. I wandered through the park for 3 hours, forcing myself to keep walking until my legs began to ache, until the air cleared my mind a little, and my heart pounded with panic. When I got home, I saw the suitcases on my porch. For a moment, my heart jumped. Was this really it? Maybe they realized how far they had gone. Maybe they had finally decided to leave on their own. But when I went to the door and tried to insert the key into the lock, it didn't turn. I tried again. No response. The mechanism didn't respond. I froze, looking at the handle, at the familiar wood of the door, at the plate with the number that I had screwed on myself on my first day in this house. They had changed the locks. I stood on my own porch, looking at the suitcases abandoned next to me and the lock that no longer recognized my key, as if I were a stranger, as if my life had suddenly become someone else's rented property. My hands shook as I tried to insert the key again and again, knowing it was useless but unable to believe it. I knocked on the door. Silence. I knocked harder. "I know you're in there," I screamed. "This is my home." And finally, from inside, my mother's voice came, muffled and slightly mocking. "If you don't like living with us, maybe you should leave, not us." "Open that door right now," I cried, my throat raw with the strain. "We're not opening anything, Casey. You made your choice when you embarrassed us in front of our friends." I stood on my doorstep, under the cold morning sky, and couldn't believe that this was really happening. My own family. My flesh and blood. My home stolen from me. I loaded my suitcases into the trunk, glanced at the windows where someone was probably at that very moment pouring themselves a cup of coffee from my mug, and drove to the nearest motel. The clerk at the counter looked at me with sympathy, the kind of soft look you give to people in trouble, without knowing the details. He was probably wondering what kind of person would walk into a motel with suitcases and tears in their eyes. That night, when the motel room felt both too small and too empty, and my head was still buzzing with betrayal and rage, I picked up the phone and, without thinking, called my friend Sarah, who was a lawyer and the rare person with whom I could be completely honest without fear of judgment. We'd known each other since college. She knew almost everything about my family, how I'd helped them over the years, how many times I'd put their needs before my own. "Sarah, I need help," I said, my voice betraying me. "My family, they locked me out of my own home." "Casey, slow down," she said immediately, and her calm, professional and warm, seemed to give me some grounding. "Tell me exactly what happened." I told her everything. The bare bones. The phony renovations, the renters in their house, the $10,000 I'd given them thinking I was helping, and how they'd eventually changed the locks, kicking me out of my own home. Sarah was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Jesus Christ, Casey. Your family, they're seriously messed up. Could they do that?" I asked. "Can they really claim tenant rights in my home?" "That's not how they do it," Sarah replied. "They don't have a lease with you, and they obtained their right to occupancy by fraud. I can prepare an eviction notice tomorrow. Please do it." "I want them gone," I said, feeling the confidence in my voice for the first time in a long time. "I'll prepare the paperwork tonight," she promised. "Can you meet me at my office in the morning?" The next day, before noon, Sarah handed me a carefully drafted, formal eviction notice that gave my family 2 weeks to leave my property. She also added a clause about the fraudulent nature of the $10,000, stating that the funds had been obtained through misrepresentation. "I'll deliver it in person," she offered. "You don't need to deal with them again." "Not now." "Thank you," I whispered. "I don't think I can handle another meeting with them." I spent the entire day in the motel, ignoring the phone that wouldn't stop ringing. First it was my mom. Then Jessica. Then my dad. I couldn't hear their voices. I didn't want to hear the excuses, the promises, the tears. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what life sounded like when it wasn't ruined. Around noon, Sarah texted me. The papers were delivered. They were shocked. Your mom tried to argue, but I quickly shut her down. 15 minutes later, my phone started vibrating non-stop. Calls, texts, notifications, one after another. I watched the numbers climb. 40 missed calls, 30 texts in an hour. They were panicking. The messages started out as pleading, "Casey, we can work this out. Let's talk like adults." Then they turned to pressure, "Families shouldn't fight like this. You're being ridiculous. We raised you better. You're destroying this family over money." I stared at the screen, feeling the weight in my chest grow heavier, but my heart grow harder. Finally, I sent a single message: "You have 2 weeks to get out of my house. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police and filing a $10,000 fraud report." After that, the phone went silent. No calls, no messages. Silence. Sarah checked in with me over the next week. "Your mom tried calling my office twice," she said one evening. "She says she wants to negotiate." I told her there was nothing to negotiate. 2 days before the deadline, Sarah called, her voice unexpectedly light. "They're moving out. I drove by your house this morning. There was a truck there, your dad loading boxes, Jessica carrying bags. It looks like they really are moving out." I felt something warm and heavy leave my body, like a weight I'd been carrying for months had suddenly disappeared. The next day, Sarah confirmed, "They left completely last night. The house is empty. You can go home." Going home felt surreal. I half expected it all to be some kind of cool joke, and that when I turned onto my street, I'd see everything back, with silhouettes flickering outside the windows and my mother's laughter coming from the kitchen as if nothing had happened. But as I slowly pulled into the driveway, my heart began to beat faster. The house was silent. The house was empty. I pulled out the spare key I'd hidden under a flower pot on the back porch and, inserting it into the lock, tremblingly pressed the handle. The door gave way. I walked in. The silence was deafening. No laughter, no footsteps, no murmur of the television in the next room. Just the slight creak of the floor beneath my feet. I stood in the hallway, listening to these sounds like music. I forgot what my home sounds like without the constant noise and chaos. The first thing I did when I entered the quiet of my own home was call a locksmith to change the locks, this time to ones that couldn't be opened with a spare key, a master key, or, now new, the good intentions that paved the road to hell. I watched as the man installed the new hardware without asking any questions, and in every click of the screwdriver, in every turn of the key, I heard a ritual of purification, as if I were finally symbolically locking the door behind all the pain, deception, and betrayal that had entered my life. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, quietly, methodically, with an inner calm that resembled meditation. They left the house in disarray, as if they wanted to remind me one last time who was the boss here. Trash in the corners of the rooms, forgotten boxes with empty packages, dirty dishes in the sink, dried stains on the dining room table. But I didn't care. I wasn't angry. I was just happy that they gave me back my space, my breath, my right to be alone with myself and not feel guilty about it. Over the next few days, the messages from my family did not stop, and as if on purpose, each one began and ended with notes of guilt, manipulation, and reproach. Mom sent long paragraphs full of pathos about how I destroyed the family and how my actions broke her heart. Dad left voicemails in which I sounded disappointed and hidden threats. He said that I would regret this decision, that one day, finding myself alone, I would realize that I turned away from those who truly loved me. Jessica, as always, was blunt, calling me selfish, callous, heartless, and a little princess who had been given too much freedom. I deleted everything. Without hesitation. Without reading it all the way through. Without listening. Without responding. Just hitting the delete button and feeling another ounce of pain drain from me with each tap of the screen. About a week later, Sarah called me and told me she'd heard from mutual friends. They all live in a 2-bedroom apartment together. She said, not hiding the surprise in her voice. "It looks like they're waiting for your parents' lease to end so they can move back into their own place." "How long?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "From what I heard, another 6 months." I almost felt sorry for them, the cramped quarters, the constant jostling, the lack of personal space. Almost. But only almost. Sarah, with the directness I always appreciated, added, "And by the way, your parents are still collecting rent from the family living in their house. So, despite the inconvenience, they are not suffering financially." This reminded me of my $10,000, the amount I had once transferred with ease, driven by love, trust, and a desire to help. I could have sued. I could have gotten the money back. There could have been a trial, compensation, lawyers. But I didn't want to. The stress I had experienced in reclaiming my space was enough to understand that peace was worth more than justice. I didn't want more. I just wanted them out of my life. Forever. A month later, I finally returned to my normal life, or rather, began to create a new one in which there were only my desires, my choices, and my rules. I could work calmly again, without fear that someone would burst into the room without knocking. My utility bills were back to normal, and my weekends were mine again. No one was throwing loud parties in the house. No one was rearranging my furniture. No one was telling me I was ungrateful. Some of our mutual family friends were texting me, calling me, asking what had happened, because they had heard a different version from my parents. They wanted to mediate, to restore peace. "Casey, you have to forgive them," one of my cousins told me. "Family is everything, after all." But I had already made up my mind. I changed my phone number. I blocked everyone on social media. I didn't want their apologies, their justifications, their new attempts to conquer my weakness and drag me back into their endless drama. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe in my own home. I rearranged the furniture to my liking, moved the chair closer to the window, removed my mother's sideboard, threw out all the tasteless pillows that had once appeared in the living room without my knowledge. I filled the kitchen with food that I actually wanted to eat: yogurt with honey, fresh berries, sharp cheddar, my favorite almond milk. And every morning, when I woke up, I enjoyed the luxury of silence, in which there was no room for other people's voices. My home was mine again. My life was mine again. Some people think that I was too harsh, that you can't cut off your entire family from yourself, that blood is thicker than water, that family is sacred, that you have to be able to forgive, no matter what. But these people don't know what it's like to be used, lied to, and manipulated by those who are supposed to love you unconditionally, with the ease of predators who think you're not going anywhere. I've learned something important. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from toxic people, even if they share your DNA. Sometimes family is just biology. And home is a place where you won't be betrayed. I'm happier now than I've been in years. And I sleep better at night knowing that no one can change my locks anymore. The house is quiet, the bills are paid, and the family drama is finally over.